there's these infectious germs and we're supposed to kill the germs and we'll be safe and healthy. And that's not how health works. That's not how disease works. We know now from massive amounts of research and evidence that diseases are not overwhelmingly not caused by bacteria.
Lend me your ears. This nation will rise up.
Welcome to the Elemental Health Podcast. Welcome back to the Elemental Health Podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in for this episode again. So things are slightly different on this episode. I am interviewing someone who I consider to kind of being on the fringe of kind of understanding and the way that he's approaching things at the moment. And you know, we're at a time now where everything that we do is being sort of curated in terms of what we see on social media and also the news as well. So guys like Brendan, who I've got on the podcast for you today, are really kind of trying to pull back the layers on that and understand what's going on and why things are the way they are, and trying to delve into the controversy, unpick what is true and what is not. And I think it adds a really interesting flavour to have a different narrative on what's going on in the world at the moment, and see things from a slightly different perspective, and also kind of, you know, have the confidence, the courage, I would say, to challenge what's being told in the mainstream media. I'm always looking for ways to challenge the way I'm thinking about something, the main paradigms, the mainstream paradigms, my own dogmas, and I think having a kind of two-way conversation with Brendan really helps to develop that. And ladies and gents, we have Brendan D. Murphy. Well, before we get started, there's just a final edit update. For some reason, I corrupted the first 10 minutes of the conversation. So we dive straight in. It's not that hard to pick up. I'm sure you guys will catch up on where we are and where we're going with it. And we're straight in at the deep end. So it's going to be juicy. Massive apologies for that. Apologies, Brendan, if you're listening back, and apologies to the audience, guys. I do my best with the tech, but I'm no tech guru. Anyway, let's go. Cool, awesome. And so what? How do you thread it all together? So I guess I've got some comments here that I'd like to kind of dive in and chat to you about. But based on what you said, so obviously, I think we can all understand that there's a synergy between the spiritual realm and health. But how do you actually thread that together and see it all fitting together? Obviously, that's a massive question, but I don't know where you start. Normally, when you're chatting to someone who kind of is kind of skirting around the edges, which I guess is probably where a lot of people are. Yeah,
it's a huge question, man. I mean, ultimately, I guess it comes back to, you know, if you're looking at it in terms of health, your consciousness is kind of mediated by the mind-body dynamic. So there's that whole sort of field of like meta or epigenetic and metagenetics, where, you know, what we think and what we feel and what we eat and all these other environmental factors influence, you know, how we physically operate and the physiological responses we have. So, you know, that's, I guess, a bridge, you know, as far as tying it together in my life. I guess that's an ongoing kind of juggling act.
Cool. And so with that said, then where do you think the kind of mainstream is in terms of pulling that together, or is it a juxtaposition for you in terms of people moving in away from that centered being that understands health at an intrinsic level?
Well, yeah, the mainstream is pretty. I mean, that's always the last place where anything changes or new information registers. So, you know, they'll be the last to sort of find out and the last to change. But it's not a woo thing anymore to talk about like epigenetics and the way that, you know, we are influenced by our thoughts and the environment and how it changes. So, you know, that's pretty well documented now over the last 30, 40, even, you know, 50 odd years plus. So, yeah, we're pretty well grounded, like in terms of science on that side of things. Yeah, it's not really particularly controversial.
But so I guess, yeah, it's hard to kind of identify an area that I really want to kind of go deep on with you, because the spiritual realm is not something that I kind of talked at length about. Obviously, I've got my own beliefs and ideals, as we all do. But I guess I'd like to understand more about how you see that metaphysical and physical health linking together. And what are some of the key components that people need to start thinking about if they can't see that connection?
Well, I mean, I guess, at the end of the day, your mindset is the thing that's with you constantly. Everything else kind of comes and goes. You might eat one thing today and eat another thing tomorrow, but your mind, your psyche, you can never escape from. So that's kind of the thing that you, more than anything else, you've got to be on top of that, because stress, chronic stress can create a downward spiral. Physiologically, it's pretty well established now that the mind creates either wellness or it creates disease, or these symptoms that we call disease. So that's really kind of the king. That's where you start. That's where it ends. I mean, you can do I went to great pains to show this in my first book, is that consciousness itself can do things that we can barely, a lot of people can barely even imagine. So that's really where our power actually lies, is in our center, or in our consciousness. And from there, that's where we get to make those creative choices, where we choose how to respond to what happens around us, and we choose, am I going to process this in this way, or am I going to react to it in this way? And from there, that's how we're creating our reality, and choosing to create beliefs that either serve us or limit us, and that kind of thing.
So how does someone strengthen this notion that their thoughts can influence their physical health, if they're not able to make that connection? Because I think when you go to see the doctor, and this is one of my bugbears, been in clinical practice for the last decade almost, is agency. We lose that agency, we give it away. The model is very broken, and we can see that because we're getting less healthy as a population, as a global population, and things are moving in the opposite direction of what we're suggesting here, which is, I think, why it's so important that we do this work. But if someone's not able to make that connection and move away from those dogmas that we've got, and that expert agency kind of giving away center that we're in effectively, how does it work? Like, how is the mind able to influence the body? Like, at a very basic level, what sort of conversations do we need to have with those people who are like, well, and I can relate to family members who are like, I need to go to the doctor because I want a pill to fix my back pain. Yeah.
Well, I mean, think about it this way. I mean, if you've ever been, if you've ever been like frightened or something scared you or shocked you, you'll notice like your heart races, maybe you sweat, and you freak out, you have an anxiety attack or something. I mean, that's a classic example of how your mind influences your physiological functioning. It's very it's so basic and so present in our day-to-day lives, it's almost easy to overlook it and forget such obvious things. The fight or flight response. If someone comes up to you and wants to punch you in the face, you have a physiological reaction to your fear, or to your feeling of aggression towards someone. The heartbeat, all that kind of stuff, respiration, your breathing, all these things that change. So it's really, a very basic thing. It's just understanding that it's just expanding your grasp of, okay, well, here's that stuff which has been known and accepted for a long time, and expanding that zone of that influence, and understanding, okay, well, we've got studies that we can point to where we see people who meditate for a long period of time, that the structure of their brains actually change. Like certain parts of their brain associated with meditation actually grow larger, and they get, it's like when you work on a muscle at the gym and it gets bigger. It's the same kind of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of different examples of how mind interacts with physiology and actually modifies it as well. I mean, I focused a lot on the paranormal side of things as well, like how mind can externally influence systems that are not physically connected to us. You can influence my body, I could influence your body remotely. Mm-hmm. And there's heaps of studies along those lines, and remote healing studies that show this. Like, people who've been prayed for have better outcomes than people who didn't get prayed for. So it just goes on and on.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. And there's a really interesting study that's always cited about the watched atom that responds differently. I think that was well studied, a long time ago now, but really interesting. At a very kind of, I guess they've simplified it down so it contextually can be quite easy to understand. So what do you see as in this space? What do you see as the barriers to people actually moving from giving away their agency to a quote unquote expert over their health to actually taking charge and reinstalling their mindset, understanding a bit more about their kind of spiritual identity? What do you see as the barriers there?
Well, I mean, that's kind of it's a mindset thing. It's like someone has an inclination to listen to that external authority and put them on the pedestal and let them be in the driver's seat of their life. And it's like, well, you're not steering the car anymore. You're letting someone else do it. So that's the fundamental problem that we have with a lot of people. And it starts there. Like, if you're not thinking for yourself, then you can't be helped.
Yeah, but I think that's what we're seeing on a massive scale, isn't it? Really, and obviously there are glimmers of hope, in terms of how people are interacting with media, social media, and doing their own research. I think more so than ever before, which I think is really encouraging. But there is that pull, isn't there? That pull of what everyone else is buying into, I guess on a personal example, and how has your journey extricated you from that kind of bubble of general mass understanding, fear, however you want to describe it?
Yeah, well, in a lot of different ways, through a lot of different experiences and a lot of research. So, I was lucky to have an experience of very altered consciousness a long time ago, which cemented some of the beginning of my journey. Actually was reading a really interesting book by a guy you might have heard of called Michael Talbot, and it was an exploration of the holographic model of reality. So it was called the holographic universe. And so when I had experiences of consciousness that were beyond the human sort of mind and the human body and showed me that we were actually connected to something vast and infinite, that was like, well, okay, so we don't understand that. That's like almost a secret, or it's been almost a secret for our civilization, this, because we have a materialist paradigm. And it's like, well, okay, then that materialist paradigm that believes that the brain is the creator of consciousness, well, that's wrong. So what else is wrong? And it turns out that, just about everything the mainstream tells us about all the important issues, if you actually pull it apart, it turns out to be just really outdated and inaccurate most of the time.
I think, I think that's a nice notion. But for me, what brings that home is the results, right? If we can talk about health, because I guess that's the focus of my work and to a certain extent to your work as well. But obviously this conversation is probably on the fringes of everything that's going on in society, which I don't have a problem with at all. In fact, I encourage that, and it excites me, because that's how things grow. That's how we grow and develop, right? It's stepping outside of the norm. But it's interesting because the results just don't show that we're getting healthier, that we're doing the right things in terms of outcomes, and that's, I think, proof enough for anyone that I speak to as to why they should make some changes, look at things slightly differently, but most importantly, which I think links in with your work very much, is start thinking for themselves, and that kind of free thinker approach and kind of and taking control, I guess, is what we're really talking about. I'd like to switch fire. I'd like to switch fire slightly on one of your recent social media posts about the self and the identity, because I found it absolutely fascinating and wanted to kind of ask you more about it. So, what happens when someone is born in terms of given an identity versus understanding who they truly are? What is the difference there? Because I think that's not necessarily something a lot of people have thought about.
Are you getting at like the extent to which someone's identity is taught to them, as opposed to a certain
extent, yeah, and referencing the birth certificate post that you put up recently?
Okay, right. Well, yeah, okay. So you want to go down that sort of road? Yeah. Well, this is the thing. This is quite an ancient sort of a deception that's been played out on us, and it's when we are born, we think that we need to register the birth and create a birth certificate. So we go and, we go off to one of the government sort of branches or agencies and we register the birth, and they create the certificate, which is, if they print a document that has your name on it, or it looks like your name, it will say Nick Quinton, but it's going to be in all caps, or maybe just Quinton is spelt in all caps. So that process of capitalizing a name like that is called capitis diminutio maxima, if memory serves me, something like that. And basically just means the maximum diminution of your standing, your lawful standing. So what they're doing is they're creating an entity that is not you. It's kind of like an alternate version of you that exists in the world of commerce, the world of legal fiction. And governments can only deal with that world of fiction because they are themselves fiction. And that has to do with the hierarchy of law. So men and women, living men and women create, and we create things like law societies and governments and McDonald's and Hungry Jack's and all this sort of stuff. And everything that's created is inferior in legal standing, right? So we are, as men and women, we're supposed to be in charge of governments. We're supposed to be running governments. They're supposed to be accountable to us. And what they do is they create their little entity, which is this kind of like little Pinocchio thing that they deceive us into thinking is us. It's actually not. It's this entity that they control. And so when we bond ourselves with that, where if we identify with it, what we're actually doing is giving them jurisdiction and giving them control. It's like when, you get pulled over by the police and they go, Mr. Quinton, do you realize that your tail light's out or you're speeding or whatever? And if you say, oh, okay, officer, you're creating that joinder with that little entity, that fiction, that all caps entity. And we got to understand that that's not us. That is a creation from the world of fiction that's used to manipulate and control us. So we need to actually start creating the awareness of who we are at law. And at law, we are not that all caps entity. We don't want to be.
Good answer. Yeah.
Except as our agent in commerce. It's kind of like who we do business as is a fiction like that. But you don't want to think that that's who you fundamentally are at law, because that's where you diminish your status as much as can possibly be done. So it's not a good idea.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about the associated risks of that as well. So, how do we get, where does that road lead to?
Well, when you say where does it lead to, what do you have in mind?
So if we make an assumption that people are buying into kind of the identity that's created for them at birth, what are the risks of not differentiating between that and kind of your true self?
Well, I mean, I guess there's a lot, really. You could probably sit here and sort of extrapolate for an hour just on that, because it's a really good question. But I mean, some of the basic stuff is like, okay, so now you think you're that, and now you're going to go off thinking that you need to pay income tax, and you're going to go thinking that the police, you have to do anything that a police officer tells you under any circumstances, which is not the case at all. You have no rights as that entity. That's the bottom line. As that entity, you don't have rights. You have duties and obligations, and you don't get to say no. You don't get to opt out. Whereas if you understand that you are upper level and as the creator, as a living man or woman, then what happens is you come up above the legal fictions of police officers, and they're policy enforcers. They're enforcing a company policy. It's like McDonald's. Their employees have to adhere to the rules of McDonald's, right? So people who work in Macca's can't come running out to you on the street and go, hey, you have to buy a Big Mac or else we'll fine you £250 or whatever. That would be ludicrous, but we're conditioned into thinking that that's the kind of behavior or dynamic that we should have with the police, for example. And it's not, because they work for a company. And unless you're an employee of that company, the rules don't apply to you except through your consent. So the key here is understanding that consent is really everything. And that's the basis of the contract, because they're always offering a contract. Government is always offering you a contract. The police are offering you a contract. You just have to understand that you get to know who you are and then politely decline the offer.
Yeah, and that's quite a powerful way to think about it, really, isn't it? To think about that contract actually existing and you being a participant in signing up to a contract. And the examples you gave were really poignant, but the same applies to your health. I think maybe the nuances are a bit more subtle. But from clinical perspective, we assume consent, we assume the contract has been agreed, we assume that you want our help, and often I think people just don't have the level of understanding and the agency over their own thoughts, ideas, understandings, whatever it might be, to make that informed decision. Sometimes they do, and it's really interesting when you kind of, I think people get that realization. Interestingly, kind of end of life, people tend to take agency back and don't want help, or and that for me, that's a fascinating area of study, because when the outcome is the outcome that we're all on a trajectory for, suddenly that process of understanding that it is up to you what happens, and what you don't want and what you do want, it certainly becomes a powerful force. So it's good. I want to jump forward again. So on social media, you present yourself as a truth seeker, and talk about these kind of big lies. What can you share as to the key big lies? I know we've covered a lot already, but what can you share as those key big lies that people need to start waking up to?
Yeah, we've definitely touched on a couple of the fundamental ones. I think one of the biggest lies is that there is an authority out there that needs to tell you what to do and what to think and what to believe. And that has been an underpinning kind of tacit sort of almost social contract that we've agreed to for a long time, is that we're supposed to just do what the authorities tell us to do. And that's what's gotten us into the mess that we were in, because we've abrogated our agency, our responsibility, our creative powers, and we've handed them over to these crooks, these sociopaths and crooks, and we've just gone, you do it, you do my thinking for me, you run the country, I'll just be over here at the pub, swilling beers and all that, watching the footy or whatever. And it's sort of like, these people will ruin you, they will kill you, they will destroy you if you let them do your thinking for you. And we see it all the time, like in the medical system, right? In medicine, it happens every day. I mean, when doctors go on strike, death rates in hospitals tend to plummet. They go through the floor, and it's like, that should tell you something. I mean, if we took our power back, we could create something incredible here. You could create something amazing out of your life that was never possible with your agency being in somebody else's hands. So I think the belief in external authority, and whether it's religion, whether it's in the field of medicine, government, politics, I don't care what it is. The bottom line is you have to come back to the sovereign core of who you are inside and create your reality from there. Otherwise, someone else is creating it for you, and they'll create it however the hell they want to serve them.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's understand kind of, we've heard a little bit about the journey that you've been on, and I want to get to kind of where you see things going to, and what opportunities and challenges lie ahead. But before that, I want to know kind of on a tactical basis, how are you exemplifying living your life to adhere to kind of the awakening, the level of consciousness that you've got in terms of your daily routines and habits? What kind of keeps you going, keeps you focused, keeps you sane, if you like?
I think music keeps me sane more than anything, bro. I'm a musician, so if I can pick the guitar up, and if I can play, if I can sing, these are the things that they light me up. So that's the stuff that I see so many people live lives where they don't do the things that really matter, and most of them. And I'm always going to be doing this, like the truth stuff, and I'm always going to be going deeper and deeper into, what is real, what is truth, and exposing all these lies at the same time. And, that sort of all fits together. But at the end of the day, the stuff that keeps me sane is being true to me, and what is Brendan Murphy, or who is Brendan Murphy at this point in time, what does it look like for me to authentically be that guy? And it might be going out and standing in the sun and taking 30 or 40 deep breaths and breathing the sun in, and soaking up some of that prana or that charge. But I don't have super ritualized routines that I have to stick to, because It just, ever since my partner got pregnant, we've both just been, it's just like all that sort of timing and scheduling and stuff kind of went out the window. And it's just like, you just got to kind of flow with things a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. With a 1-year-old in the house, I think I couldn't agree with that more, man. It's you've got to be robust and you've got to be adaptable as you move forward. I think otherwise you lose focus very easily, really, and then it slides downwards. So that's good to hear. And I think people like your example there. I would say people, is also about finding space, finding time to actually understand what's going on. And I think, we can talk about distraction, agency, all the bits that we've mentioned, and that's going to lead you to not be able to find those gaps, to take that pause. And for me, the example you've gave is, taking a break and actually just understanding what's going on, a few deep breaths, get that physical and that sort of neuro the receptors together, going, working and trying to make the connection. I think, meditation's an easy one, because not an easy one, an interesting one, because I think people are still, certainly in my space, quite hesitant to do breathing and to meditate and to find time to meditate. Do you have anything that you can share with the listeners around kind of making that step towards it, or making that connection to actually trying to get into that space and think and breathe and rest and not think?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's such a personal thing, like that one size fits all thing just doesn't work for me, and it doesn't work for a lot of people. Like, I haven't meditated for many years until this year, when I sort of started dabbling with it a little bit, very casually. Whereas when I was like 20 through 22 years old, I was doing it pretty much daily, multiple times a week, and I was dedicated to it. But I had a reason for doing that. I had a purpose, and I was very goal driven, and I still am. Like, I don't do stuff unless it is part of some kind of, either I'm trying to get to something, I'm trying to achieve something, and then there's the downtime where it's just like unwind and let it all hang out and shake it off and relax. But to say to people, like, I don't believe that you're not spiritual if you don't meditate, for example. But if you find some reason, like maybe you want to do the Wim Hof kind of meditation, for a physiological kind of boost, so maybe you want to meditate and go deep into altered states of consciousness to peel back layers of yourself and reality. I mean, just what is it that motivates you? Like, that's kind of where I come from. And if I'm not internally inspired or motivated to do something, then I'm not doing it because other people think I should.
And is there a fear that sits behind not doing this uncovering work? So, is it a scary prospect for someone to sit with their own thoughts and try and understand where their identity comes from?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are terrified of that.
I think.
Go ahead.
No, I that's a notion that's played in my mind as I've evolved, I guess. And I think my kind of comment when I have these conversations is everyone's kind of, I don't know what your thoughts are, but everyone's on a journey. And if you have a kind of an understanding of spirituality, we're all trying to make a connection with this universe, the sense of oneness. So, you can't be spiritual trying to be on that journey and then kind of point a finger at someone else and say, you need to do X, Y, and Z, because actually you're not making that connection. If you're doing that, right, you're externalizing it, you're living in the ego, you're creating that identity, that separateness, and you're not in the hidden bit of the iceberg. You're only in the little bit that sticks up.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, we don't it doesn't matter how great you think that your practice is or your insights or whatever. It's at the end of the day, we don't get to decide for other people. We only get to decide for ourselves. Otherwise, we would be dictators or tyrants and despots, and we've already got enough of them. So we just get in our own lane, and just you do you, I'll do me, and we'll figure it out, and we can swap notes and share. And at the end of the day, we'll just do our own thing. Sound
advice. So what what is the confusion that you think people have in their mind when it comes to disease? So disease within the body. What are people's confusions around that, and the solutions to that? To switch back onto.
That's a great question. There's a few things. I mean, a lot of people, we've been indoctrinated very heavily into something called germ theory, which is a model of health and disease, which is based on some very flawed ideas that were, coming out of the 18th and 19th centuries, and which have been completely discredited, and even were discredited in the 1800s. So the idea that we are, victims of random happenstance, stuff just happens, and there's no real reason. So it's sort of like a nature is a malicious kind of a beast that just does things to us. It's kind of this victim kind of mentality. There's that aspect to it, but there's also the whole idea of, there's these infectious germs and we're supposed to kill the germs and we'll be safe and healthy. And that's not how health works. That's not how disease works. We know now from massive amounts of research and evidence that diseases are not overwhelmingly not caused by bacteria or so-called viruses, and that viruses are just little genetic packages that are created inside of us, in our cells, as a response to stress and toxicity. They're not infectious. They're useless outside the cell. They do nothing once they're out of your body. So it's just a complete, we're turning the model on its head, and it's completely upside down because it's been upside down all along. So, we can let go of these ideas that we are, they're so disempowering. The germ theory is inherently disempowering. The warfare model of health and disease, if you kill enough germs, you'll be okay. If you wear your mask, you'll be okay. It's completely neurotic and self-destructive, and it distracts people from what actually does create health, which is first and foremost your psychological reality. Your psyche is primary determinant, and then you've got things like, obviously everyone talks about nutrition and everyone talks about your water and all this kind of stuff. So those are the elements that we should be paying attention to. Is firstly our relationship to our psyche, and then our relationship to our environment and our food and our water and our living conditions. And is it sanitary? Are we living with rotting corpses? These are conditions that used to actually exist in the Western world. As far as, even into the 17 and 1800s. And it wasn't until then that we started getting on top of the living conditions, that we started conquering so-called communicable diseases. And they're not communicable diseases. They're diseases of the environmental conditions and stress and trauma and toxicity. So we got rid of those conditions, and then, you can watch the graphs all just nosedive, and then, they almost bottom out. They almost hit that bottom line there, and then, mass vaccination, it's like, vaccines saved us, and that's just another complete con. That's not what happened at all. We changed the result. We changed the outcome, and we got better results by changing our food, our water, living conditions, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's the comment for me. It's the comment about, we need to create an environment for the body to heal itself if there's a problem, and that is what modern medicine tries to do, but people don't understand that, and they think it's take a pill to fix a problem, and that's never been the case. And the fact that you have to take pills for life suggests that you're not creating that homeostasis for the body to actually nurture and heal itself. And the other comment I would throw in there to all the bits all the great bits that you added in there is community. And I think that's one of the big issues I have with what's going on at the moment is this isolation, which is very unnatural. And as soon as we move away from what is a natural state, we become very unhealthy as a species. And the other thing is, the germ theory is almost comical now. The more and more I've thought about it, and the more I've kind of practiced and spoken to people and thought, and just kind of been on this journey. But because we are part of the ecosystem, we're not separate to nature, and that I think the germ theory sort of reinforces this notion we're very separate to our environment and what's going on around us, and we should be living in little boxes covered in cellophane that are full of chemicals to keep us quote unquote clean, and that is probably the worst environment that you could have been, and people that are in that environment are usually very, very sick, and we see that people that spend a lot of time in hospitals that are overly sanitized don't get healthy.
No, I mean, a hospital is not a healing environment at all. It's a sickness disease management environment, and you're better off just avoiding them as much as you can. And you made some really good points there. I mean, the germ theory itself empowers the kind of things we've seen with the lockdowns and this kind of stuff, which are these irrational behaviors that we're seeing. Like, people are being told to lock themselves indoors in the dark, don't move, don't get fresh air, don't get sunlight. All the things that we have abundant evidence are actually good for us, we're being told not to do, and we're socially disconnected, which is one of the worst things about it, because now you're depriving people of the psychological health, which underpins the physiological health probably more than anything. So it's really, we are social animals, and it's really destructive to force people into isolation like that, particularly when they're not sick, and that's called house arrest. And also, the body runs on electricity more than anything else. And when you hug someone, the person who has the most voltage or the most charge, they kind of discharge into the person with the lower voltage. So you get this kind of great sharing of charge, this shareability of charge, when you have that contact with people that you care about, and that community around you that you were talking about. And that community is so essential. It's just part of the environment around us. And so we run on electricity. When you cut people off from that physical touch, and that ability to trade electrons with each other, and to trade electrons by putting your bare feet on the ground with the planet, or your house cat or dog sitting on your lap, and they come in from outside and they sit on your lap and they discharge their electrons into you, and that's part of a healing kind of dynamic. And we're doing some very self-destructive, irrational things in the name of health and medicine right now, but it's all underpinned by germ theory. And if we can get it in our heads that germ theory is a completely unscientific superstition, then we can stop doing these ridiculous things and start doing things that actually support us.
Yeah. Yep. Brendan, I just want to be respectful of time, and there's so many different topics that we haven't even touched on yet. And I know your understanding and your views on water and the the cleanliness of water and the type of water that we should be drinking are at the forefront of the stuff that you do. And I want to dive into that. I don't think we're going to have time now, but so I want to switch fire for the last little component here and try and understand. Obviously, we've got this cloud over us at the moment. We need to find a way through. What opportunities do you see? What is the silver lining of what's happened in 2020? What's gonna kind of keep us going and actually allow us to develop and grow as humans?
It's an awesome opportunity to step out of fear and out of that mentality of trusting authority figures and not thinking for yourself. So it's a great opportunity for people to start thinking themselves. I've seen it in just so many cases of it this year, including people close to me who have, even baby boomers who, are typically quite sort of hard-nosed and stubborn and very difficult to red pill. And even some of them are starting to go, hang on a minute, this doesn't make sense. So it's a fantastic opportunity to reclaim our power and actually start working together and collaborating and reestablishing our connections at a grassroots level, because we also are being given a great opportunity to see that we can't trust the people in charge who are running things, and that they don't work for us. So we also have a chance to kind of reform the political system and start infiltrating into it and putting real decent humans in there who actually are representatives of the people and the people's will. There are so many aspects of this year where the authority structure has just been so over the top, so fraudulent, so dishonest and ludicrous that they've given us a chance to step away from germ theory and into an empowering health paradigm. They've given us a chance to step out of the sort of mindless political mentality of just, following the left or following the right and, let them decide, and taking responsibility and claiming ownership. And that's kind of the whole point of all of this to me is we've had all these different systems which kind of combine into one system of control, which is all dependent on distracting us from who and what we really are. And once we get who and what we really are and we take ownership of ourselves, their little house of cards comes crashing down and they lose all power. I mean, we outnumber those clowns by many, many, many times. So the power's in our hands. All we have to do is take ownership of it and move forward and work together. That's it. Just collaborate and work together.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think I couldn't agree with you more. Although it's been challenging and it's been saddening to see what's going on in a lot of respects. I think, I agree with you. I think it's a real awakening that we are seeing. And it's an interesting comment you made about the baby boomers, actually. So that's not something I've thought about, because not necessarily my audience, but in terms of the guys I interact with. But yeah, it's certainly it's interesting to see a split in that space that perhaps before you wouldn't, everyone toes the party line. For me, I think the system has got to change, because the system is producing the people that are getting to make these key decisions. I think that's the structure as well. It's got to be thought about in depth. But no, I think there are a lot of opportunities. There is a real awakening going on in the world. And yeah, it's an exciting time as much as it is as a challenging time for lots of people. Brendan,
sorry, man, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just thought, we've had, with all the lockdowns and all this disruption, we've also had the chance to actually take a look at how we live our lives, how we spend our time, how we earn our money. And a lot of people have been going through this process of questioning that for the first time in their lives. And a lot of people are going, you know what, I don't like that job a whole lot. I think I'd rather do this with myself, and actually listening to the calling of the heart and the soul inside of you. So that's kind of where this is all kind of leading us, is to peel away the layers of the fraud and the conditioning and come back to the center point where we can actually hear the whisperings of the soul. And it's a beautiful time to be alive right now if we take the scales off our eyes and stop pretending to be victims here and really take charge here. It's it's our game. It's our game. We can create something amazing here potentially.
I think that's a really lovely place to pause. I'd love to speak to you again, Brendan, about all the other bits and pieces that we haven't spoken about on this conversation, although we have jumped around a lot and covered a huge amount in a very short space of time. Can I invite you to kind of let us all know a bit about yourself, the books that you've written, and how people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks, man. So my first book is out. You can get it through my website, which is brendandmurphy.com. It is a very deep exploration of science and spirituality and bridging those two worlds and the paranormal and consciousness. So that's kind of where I kind of live there. But yeah, you'll find my blog and my podcast is at truthaverse.com. And most of those episodes I've had experts on to talk about health and disease and, pulling apart the germ theory model and the scamdemic. So that's a really good resource as far as that stuff goes. So truthaverse.com if you want to check out the podcast interviews with those fine people. Otherwise, yeah, my stuff is at brendandmurphy.com.
Brendan, it's really powerful work that you're doing. I think it's absolutely important. It's vital in terms of people identifying with someone who is saying something different, and we will all relate to different people in different ways. So it's important to have lots of different people doing these, living on the fringes and looking at these things. I know you don't think it's a fringe, but looking at these things slightly differently from the mainstream and getting away from that mainstream dogmas and paradigms and the stuff that we know isn't working. Simple as that. So thank you for your work, and I acknowledge you for the good work that you do. And thank you very much for coming on. Hopefully we'll be able to do a round 2 very, very soon. Yeah, thanks, Nick. I'll do a round 2 whenever you like, mate. Appreciate your time. Cool, man. Excellent. Brendan, thank you very much, man. I'll cut it there somewhere. I really appreciate your insight. Yeah, definitely. Look, you blow me away with some of the comments and I think, I don't want to say the level you're at, because that sounds like a bit of I'm creating a bit of a divide, but I think the thought and the transitions that you've made from, or the way that you've blended together the health and the psychological component is amazing, I think, and listening to some of the stuff that you've posted out, it's deep work. It really is, and I think a lot of people are hesitant and fearful to do that deep work. I'm probably one of those guys at certain points, so yeah, man, it's wicked to engage with you and get you on. Thanks, bro. I appreciate it. Yeah, well, let's not be shy about it in future. Let's go deep. There we go. Intriguing stuff. As I said in the intro, Brendan, it is kind of out there doing his thing, and I've got so much respect for that. And it's great to have him on as a guest and get into the weeds with some of these topics. Hope you enjoyed that one, guys, and I hope it's got you thinking and got you challenging your own thoughts, your own kind of dogmas and the way you're looking at situations. That is my goal with these podcasts, is to keep throwing curveballs until change happens. That's the goal. 2021 is all about energy and mobility for me. If you're interested in that, if it's an area you want to focus on, go to elementalhealth.co. You can sign up for my free challenge and also get some more information on the things that I'm doing there. If you want to follow Brendan, it's Brendan D. Murphy on Instagram. He's put some great content there, brendandmurphy.com. And me, as always, at elemental_Nick on the socials. That's NICK. And I will look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, and leave us feedback. Cheers.